Hey everyone, welcome back. So we're in our advanced programming series here, and I know advanced can sound scary, but today we're going to explain something that sounds complicated, delegates, in a simple, beginner-friendly way. If you ever wanted to one script to notify another script when something happens, delegates are your best friend, and we do this a lot in Unity. So we're going to use them to track down when a game object moves, rotates, or scales, which is what we've been programming before, and then we're going to fire off custom actions when those things happen. So let me break this down step by step for you. Okay, so what is a delegate? A delegate is a type that can hold a reference to a function, just like a variable can hold a number to a string. So you can think of it like a remote control. The delegate doesn't do anything by itself. It just points to a method, and when you press the remote or call the delegate, it runs whatever function it's pointing to. So let's take a look at a very basic example. Okay, so what I'd like to add back is, let's see. So we know that this is our movement setting. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And let's add that header onto our cube. So we'll move that here. Let's go back to our cube, make sure that updated. So we know this is our movement settings here. The next thing I'm going to do is give myself a couple lines of code here. And I'm going to define the delegate type. So what we're doing here is we're declaring a function shape. So I point to a function that takes a vector3 and it returns nothing. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so here is a public and we define it as a delegate. And again, sometimes you have to code it out and get through it before you fully understand it. And this delegate, it doesn't return anything. And we're calling it transform change. And we get a value, and that's a vector3, which is called new value here. Okay, so let's go ahead and declare the events that work with the delegate, right? So these events will trigger when something happens. So notice that these events have the same name. So here's a delegate, and then we have an event that connects with this delegate that's called the same name as our function. And one event is called onMoved, another event is called onRotated, another one's called onScaled. You might be wondering, well, why are these lightly grayed out? And it's because we're not using them yet, but we will. All right, so let's go ahead and use this onMoved event here. Okay, so I'm going to go down into my handle movement script, and you can see we have this float horizontal, vertical, all that stuff, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to space this out just a little bit, and I'm going to say, okay, we have this variable 3, this direction here, which is using horizontal and vertical. And I'm going to wrap this transform.translate in an if statement. Okay. So I'm going to type if, and then I'm going to hit tab here. And what I'll do is delete this code, which we are going to bring back later. And I'm just going to put this translate inside of here. Okay. So what's happening here is it automatically created this for me, which is nice. But it says if direction is not equal to 0. Vector 3.0 is a shorthand way of saying if we're not moving. So if x, y, and z aren't all set to 0. So if they are not all set to 0, which means we've pressed their WASD keys, we're going to move our character. But what I'd like to do is I would like to use a delegate to let my to send a signal out and say that, hey, we have moved, right? So how do we do that? Well, we can do that with this line of code here. Oops. Looks like I copied that. Let me go ahead and pause it and then get that in there. All right, so we have this onMoved method, and you might be like, whoa, this is a little scary. What is this question mark doing here? The question mark is called the null conditional operator. It's also known as a safe call operator. And what it is, it's a way of safely invoking a delegate only if it's null. So what does null mean? I keep saying this word null, and it can be a little scary. Null means nothing is here. There's no value, no object, no reference. So all this is saying is, hey, if there isn't a position going on, right? There's no transform.position, we're going to invoke it, which means we're going to broadcast out that we're currently in this onMoved state. All right, so let's do another one for scaling down here so we can see that in action. What I'd like to do here is I'd actually like to add a Boolean variable, and it's just going to be called scaled, and I'm going to make that equal to false. And what this is going to do is we're going to say, hey, if we're using our input here, right, this key code, and because we're going to be having multiple lines of code, we actually need to wrap this if statement here. So I'm going to move this up. I'm going to say Boolean scaled equals true. And I'm going to do the same thing here. And all this is saying is, hey, if we're actually scaling up our transform here, we're going to set scale to true. And we don't need to define it here. That's going to give us errors because we're using this same scaled value. So what's happening here is when I press the Z key, we set scale to true. When I push the X key, we're setting it to true. But once I release that, we're calling handle scaling again. It automatically sets it back to false. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put an if statement here. And I'm going to say, hey, if scaled is true, which means that we push these keys, we're going to send a signal out. That's all these delegates doing. That's what this is doing. Broadcasting that, hey, our current transform.local scale, that we're actually scaling something up. And then we're going to create another script in a second that's going to essentially show you how this works in complete detail. All right, so let's do the same thing in rotation here. I'm going to make a Boolean value called rotated false. And I'm going to pause the video and just kind of type out, get all the code so that it adds all these curly braces and that we set our rotation to true like we did with our scale. All right, so we have a Boolean here that's rotated that's called false. Rotation is set to true. So every time we push Q and E, we rotate it, and then we set rotated to true. Nothing crazy going on, right? We're just setting this to true. And if this is set to true, then we're going to broadcast out a signal saying transform.Euler angles, right? We're sending out the angles. Now let's go ahead and create another script so you can actually see this functioning or working. All right, so in the scripts folder, I'm going to right click. I'm going to create another C# script. We'll do mono behavior here, and we're just going to call this transform logger. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And now what we need to do is a couple things, right? I want to reference my game object controller here, which has all of that scaled logic that we put in there, especially, all this delegate stuff, right? So inside of here, let's go ahead and create a serialized field. I'm going to just type this out so you guys can see it in action. And it's private, and it's just game object controller, and I'm going to call that game object controller. So this variable here is just creating, and again, I have some GitHub stuff in there, so it's auto-populating for us, which is totally fine. We have this here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save this. And what I can do is, let's see, so we can still use this script, I'm going to grab my transform logger and just drop it on top of here. And then inside of our start method here, I'm going to grab my game object controller, and I'm going to say equals get component game object controller. So when I press play now, what this line of code does, I'm sure if you've done other game stuff with me, you're familiar with this, but what this does is it'll automatically grab this game object controller script here and place it inside here so we can access it in our script. Let's make sure to save this. All right, so as a check, what I can do is I can say, hey, if game object controller not equal to null, I'm going to go ahead and, looks like these didn't transfer over right. I'm going to say game object controller dot on moved, on rotated, and on scaled is equal to the us essentially logging the movement. So we need to create 3 methods, right? So actually I can bring those back: log scale, log rotation, log position, but we'll call this one log moved. So what it's doing is, we'll take a look at this in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and hit and create each one of these methods like that. All right, so now we have 3 methods that take in a vector 3, which is, this would be for me, I would make this position, we'll make this one rotation, and then make this one scale. And I'm just going to put in I'm going to pause the video and just put in some log statements, and then we're going to run through the code, all the way through the code together from the beginning. All right, so let me go ahead and press play here, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C to open up my console. Okay, so here's our console. It's completely clean, and I'm just going to push the A key. Now you can see we have scaled to, oh, actually, did I put that in the wrong spot? Let's see. Log scale, move to position. Yeah, that's why. So I have this, and it should be, these two should be switched. Let me kind of put this one up here. That's why we're getting, let's make sure that we, sorry, I'm just, oh, wait, that should be log move. Yeah, position. Okay, let's try that again. Let's clear this out. Press play. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and press A here, and you could see that it picked up even the subtle nuances. So it moved to position 0. So what exactly is happening? Well, let's select our cube and look at this from the get-go. So we have a game object controller script here, right? And then we have this delegate. We're just calling it a delegate, and this is sort of a method name. We call this transform change, right? And there are these events that are being sent out. They're being broadcasted out. And one is on moved, on rotated, on scale. Now, when we push our, essentially, any of our our keys, right? So we're handling our movement here. So our horizontal movement. So what we're saying here, for example, in handle movement, we're saying, okay, if we're moving at all, we have any sort of direction, which we are because we're storing our WASD keys in horizontal and vertical. And then direction is what's actually moving it. If direction has any value whatsoever, which again is connected to horizontal and vertical, we're going to actually move our cube. So that's what this line of code does, nothing new. And then we're going to say, hey, if we have direction or movement, we're going to broadcast or send a signal out that we're currently moving. So we're going to invoke this transform.position. So where does this happen? Well, we jump to this transform logger script here, right? Because it's looking for, it's sending out a broadcast to anything that's listening. How do we know what's listening? Well, if we go into transform logger here, we created essentially these events here, which are listening. Sorry, these events here, which are listening, right? They're listening for any kind of movement. Okay. So we'll say, okay, on moved, we're going to invoke, and we call transform.position. So where are we sending it? Well, if we go inside of here, we're saying, hey, on GameObject.controller on moved, we're going to add this method to that event. That means we're listening for this event. And so now this event here, which is on move vector 3 position, it's passing in the position, right? That's being sent from here, right? We're transforming or sending our position into here. And then all we're doing here is with debug.log is we're saying, hey, we moved to this position and we're storing the position. Now, Unity's entire system is built on this event-driven system, right? So we're going to be doing more tutorials on, broadcasting events and stuff. And it's actually built into things like if we look at the UI here and we create something like a button. So I'm going to create a Text Mesh Pro button. You'll see down at the bottom here, I'm going to go ahead and import TMP assets, essentials. There's this on click. This is connected to an event system, which again, I don't expect this to be completely, delegates are a little bit of a confusing topic. That's why I included them in advanced. So we're going to be using them a lot. And as you program and do it more and more and the explanations start to get more defined, you'll start to see it more in action. But just remember, there's 3 parts to it. There's you're essentially creating a delegate, and then you're creating an event. These are the events that will trigger when something happens, right? So we have on move, on rotation, on scale. And our event is pretty simple. We're just saying, hey, we're testing if there's something happening in a direction, then we'll go ahead and just invoke that event. And in this one, all we're doing is we're just sending whatever the current position is to another script. Notice we're not calling this transform logging script from here at all. But what we're doing is we're referencing in this game controller, and then we're saying, hey, listen, if this happens, right, like if we're on moved, we're going to pass in whatever this method does here. And in this one, all it does is it passes the position. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Like I said, we're going to be doing a lot more. Maybe I'll do a follow-up delegate video right after this one that builds on delegates.